Before the world knew his name, before the scrolls carried his wisdom, there was a boy born into shadows and silence. In the kingdom of Lu, over 2,500 years ago, a child named Confucius entered the world not with gold or privilege, but with a destiny heavy as stone. His father, a soldier weathered by years and battle, was gone before the boy could even remember his face. His mother, young yet resolute, whispered promises of greatness into the quiet night, knowing her son would carry the weight of the world before he could lift it. Poverty surrounded him like a cage. Society dismissed him, but even as a child, Confucius burned with questions that no one dared to ask. Why do men lie to hold power? Why does cruelty rule over kindness? Why do rulers fear wisdom but worship war? While other children played, he watched, he listened, he questioned. Every laugh at his seriousness, every glare at his curiosity, only fanned the flames in his heart. He scavenged knowledge from travelers, from farmers, from the whispers of monks and dancers, and read ancient scrolls under the dim light of oil lamps while the city slept. He had no money, no title, no status, but a single, unyielding desire. He wanted to understand life itself, and in that desire, a legend began to stir. The world had no idea that this poor boy, who began as a caretaker of animals and a warehouse clerk, would one day teach truths so radical that kings would fear him, elders would mock him, and yet generations would bow to his wisdom. Even before he spoke a word to the first student, Confucius knew the path of truth is lonely, painful, and dangerous, but it is worth every shadowed step. He believed the world could only be healed if people learned to live with honor instead of fear, if sons respected their parents, if leaders served the people rather than feeding their own hunger for power, and if rituals were used to shape the soul, not to control the masses. One thought lived constantly in his mind like a quiet fire. When people are ruled by punishment, they hide their wrongdoing, but when they are guided by virtue, they change from within. This idea was dangerous because it challenged the foundation of power itself. In the silence of his nights, Confucius carried one fragile hope. If I could stand beside even one good ruler, I could help him build a kingdom that does not bleed. And so the wandering began. He left his home behind and walked across ancient China with worn sandals and unwavering faith, sleeping beneath open skies, carrying no gold and no protection, only scrolls filled with truth. He stood before governors and kings and spoke calmly, saying, "Let me help you rule with wisdom, not terror." But some mocked him, some fed him out of pity, and others closed their gates and banished him as a mad philosopher. Yet every rejection only sharpened his resolve, because deep inside he understood something rulers did not. I was not born to impress power. I was born to protect people. And with that belief, his journey transformed from a search for approval into a mission of endurance, because even without a throne or an army, truth itself walked beside him. As the years passed, the road grew longer and the burden heavier, and Confucius became the man who walked alone through a broken world, rejected by kings, laughed at by officials, and ignored by those addicted to violence, yet still moving forward while others stayed silent. He had no soldiers, but his words cut deeper than blades. and no wealth, yet his values outweighed entire empires. Now in his 50s, he left comfort behind entirely, choosing exile over silence, walking thousands of miles with a small bag of scrolls, a wooden staff, and a belief that refused to die. But the land he crossed was drowning in chaos. Warlords burned villages, corruption rotted governments, and innocent families paid the price. At one palace, guards blocked his path and demanded his name, and he answered softly, "I am a teacher of virtue. I ask for no gold, only a chance to guide with wisdom." But laughter was his reply, and doors slammed shut behind him once more. He did not curse fate or weep in anger. Instead, he turned to his students and reminded them that a river does not stop flowing just because a mountain stands in its way. Winter came, food vanished, sickness spread, and despair crept into the hearts of his followers. And one night a student asked him why they continued when no one listened. Confucius looked frail, exhausted, nearly broken, yet his voice carried quiet strength as he said, "A lamp means nothing in daylight, but in darkness, even a small flame can save a life." Beneath cold stars, beside a fragile fire, he taught ethics, discipline, humility, loyalty, and how to remain human while suffering, because he knew that even if kings refused him, history would not. Eventually, a curious ruler invited him to speak, and for a brief moment, hope returned, as Confucius taught that leaders must inspire, not intimidate, reward truth over flattery, and build hearts before armies. But fear spread among advisers who whispered that wisdom weakens control. Soon he was accused, hunted, and forced to flee under threat of death, coughing blood beneath the night sky, as he whispered to himself that they feared him not because he was wrong, but because he was right. In another province, a false invitation became a deadly trap. Swords emerged from shadows, and silence filled the hall. Yet fate intervened when a former student arrived with soldiers and declared that killing Confucius would be killing the conscience of China itself. He escaped again, alive but marked, now known not as a man of power, but as a danger to power. They followed him not for wealth, not for titles, but for meaning, for the kind of wisdom that could shape hearts and nations. Confucius taught them how to speak with dignity, how to listen with humility, how to govern with conscience, how to live with discipline, even when the world punished virtue. One student asked, "Master, what is success?" He leaned forward, eyes bright, and said, "Success is not measured by what you achieve, but by what you become." Another asked, "Will your words survive?" He smiled softly, as if looking far beyond time, and whispered, "If truth lives in people's hearts, my voice will never die." After 13 years of tireless wandering, Confucius returned to Lu, his birthplace now in his 60s, older, weary, yet unbowed. The world had begun to recognize him. Young scholars sought him out. Even old rivals bowed with respect. Temples welcomed his voice. Governors invited him to advise. Yet he never desired power. "I do not want to rule," he said. "I wish only to teach rulers how to govern themselves." He began to write, believing that wisdom must be preserved in ink and paper, not only in memory. He gathered his disciples to record the Book of Songs, the Book of Rites, the Spring and Autumn Annals, the Book of Documents, and his own analects, capturing conversations, observations, and lessons for the future. Among his students one shone brightest in his heart, Yan Hui, gentle, humble, endlessly devoted to learning. Confucius said of him, Yan Hui walks the path even when no one watches. But the heavens are merciless, and tragedy struck. Yan Hui died young, stolen by illness and a life too simple to sustain itself. Confucius stood alone, silent, the first tears breaking through his eternal calm. "The heavens are destroying me," he whispered, as though the world had taken his heart and left his body behind. For 3 days he did not eat, he did not speak, but eventually trembling hands lifted a scroll, and he wrote, "Because even sorrow cannot halt duty." His words grew deeper as he aged, like rivers carving valleys over centuries. "Do not stop," he taught. "Think as you learn as you think, respect yourself, and others will follow." He reminded rulers, peace begins in thought, spreads to family, then reaches the kingdom. Every morning he taught, every night he wrote. Even as his body weakened, even when his hands shook and his eyes blurred, he persisted. Some hated him, greedy officials, ambitious warlords, priests threatened by his truth. But he remained serene. "A crooked man hating me proves only that I walk straight," he said. As he entered his 70s, he felt time slipping like sand through fingers. Sitting by a quiet lake, he told his disciples, "My life is a bird singing in a dark forest. I do not know if anyone hears, but I sing anyway." He reflected on failures he could not correct, on joys he had nurtured, on the son he had loved from a distance, and the legacy that mattered most, his students. Confucius believed greatness could not be inherited, only earned. Kangli, his son, would carry some of his teachings, but his disciples were his true immortality. Weak, slower, his voice a whisper, he gathered them one last time. He looked at Zilu and said, "Your courage will serve the people. Zigong, your wisdom will carry my words. Zixia, your poetry will preserve beauty." He closed his eyes and spoke softly of a vision. The Duke of Zhou, a bridge built from books, a light calling him forward. The students understood. The final sunrise approached. The air was still, the sky clear, no clouds, no wind, no sound but the quiet beating of hearts and the eternal echo of a life lived in pursuit of truth. And as the sun rose, Confucius, the wandering teacher, the guardian of virtue, the father of wisdom, crossed his final bridge, leaving behind not a tomb, but a legacy that no empire, no warlord, and no century could ever silence. Confucius lay on a simple bamboo mat, his scrolls beside him, his robes pale as the winter moon, his hands resting lightly on his chest. Around him, his most faithful disciples stood. Zilu, courageous and steadfast, Zigong, quick with words, Zixia, gentle and poetic, Zhengzi, unwavering in moral judgment, and Yuzi, wise beyond his years. He looked at each of them, a faint smile brushing his lips, and whispered, "My body will return to dust, but my words, they are like water, soft, yet unstoppable." Then he closed his eyes. He did not cry, he did not tremble, he simply stopped. Silence fell over the room, heavy as a stone. Zhengzi wept first. Zigong turned his face, biting back the grief. Zilu dropped his sword and sank to his knees. The teacher was gone, and for the first time the world knew the absence of Confucius. His disciples carried his body with bare hands to a humble tomb by the Sea River in Khufu, his birthplace. They refused music, refused offerings, wore only mourning robes. Zhangzi said, "Let the world eat, we will grieve." They buried him not with gold or crowns, not with jewels or incense, but with his books, his brush, and a small bamboo flute, which would never play again. For 3 years they stayed by the grave, sleeping in tents, reading his words aloud, tending the tomb, refusing to return home. Even when families begged them, they said, "We buried the body, but the soul continues to teach." The world, however, was slow to remember. For decades, China remained fractured. Warlords battled endlessly. Some whispered, "Who was this old teacher who wandered reciting poetry?" Temples ignored his name. Kings did not quote him. He died poor, forgotten by those with power, yet his legacy did not vanish. His disciples lived on, unwilling to be silent, each returning to towns and villages to teach, to advise, to write, to carry the flame of truth. Scroll by scroll, brushstroke by brushstroke, they copied the Analects, teaching that this was not a religion, not a chant, but a way to live fully as a real human. Rituals brought discipline, quotes brought peace, lessons corrected tyrants, and slowly, like water filling the cracks of a broken vessel, Confucius returned. First, dynasties barely noticed him, but in 140 BCE, Emperor Wu of Han faced a world out of balance. Disobedient people, corrupt nobles, and a powerful but soulless empire. One advisor said, "Teach Confucius, build better minds, not taller walls." The emperor agreed, and Confucianism became the foundation of governance. Schools rose, training officials in his wisdom. Temples appeared in every province, shrines where incense burned, and lessons were read. Confucius was no longer a wandering philosopher. He became the model of virtue, the standard of learning, the soul of Chinese culture. Children memorized his words. Leaders quoted him. Neighboring countries, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, absorbed his teachings. The man who died quietly was now shaping empires. Over centuries, emperors granted him more than 50 noble titles: great sage, first teacher, model of 10,000 generations. Some gave his descendants land, power, honors. One emperor said, "If Buddha is the light of the soul, Confucius is the structure of society." His tomb became a pilgrimage. His teachings, the foundation of Chinese education for over 2,000 years, endured through the 5 classics: the Book of Rites, the Book of Songs, the Book of History, the Spring and Autumn Annals, and the Analects, his voice alive in generations. Millions memorized them. Millions passed exams built upon them. And today, Confucius is no longer only Chinese. His face appears in textbooks across the world. His words echo in Harvard lecture halls, in schools in Africa, in TED Talks, in leadership books. The teacher who once wandered alone, poor and mocked, had become immortal, not because of wealth, power, or crowns, but because he taught humanity how to live with virtue, how to seek truth, how to act with wisdom, and how to shape the world one mind at a time. Confucius's words echo everywhere, even in places where no one remembers his face. Quotes float across social media, whispered in classrooms, printed on posters, shared in speeches, often without a single soul knowing they came from a man who walked barefoot across ancient China. His lessons are eternal because they are universal. Before you seek revenge, dig 2 graves. The superior man speaks little, but acts greatly. Wherever you go, go with all your heart. Education breeds confidence. Confidence breeds hope. Hope breeds peace. He has been gone for over 2,000 years, yet he still teaches. And then came the fire. China, 1966. Chairman Mao Zedong unleashed the Cultural Revolution, a campaign to destroy the 4 olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas. And in the eyes of radical youth, Confucius embodied them all. Too traditional, too moral, too passive, too tied to emperors and scholars of a bygone era. Across the country, the unimaginable unfolded. Confucian temples were shattered, statues toppled and smashed, tombs desecrated, scrolls and books hurled into public flames. His name disappeared from textbooks. Teachers who dared quote him were accused of crimes, beaten, humiliated, forced to confess the crime of teaching wisdom. In Khufu, his sacred hometown for 2 millennia, Red Guards tore through streets, smashed altars, broke tablets, mocked his image, and even tried to dig up his grave. Imagine being a schoolteacher in 1966, having devoted your life to Confucius, suddenly declared an enemy. Scholars wept silently as libraries burned. Mothers secretly burned Confucian books to protect their children. Children were taught Confucius was a lie. Revolution the only truth. The man who preached virtue and peace was attacked in the name of progress, and the world seemed determined to erase him. Yet history has a stubborn way of surviving. By the late 1970s, after Mao's death, China began to reopen, and slowly, astonishingly, Confucius returned. Schools reinstated his teachings. Temples rose again, stone by stone. Ancient texts were reprinted. The government itself admitted a mistake, recognizing that ethics, culture, and wisdom cannot be replaced by power alone. The flame had endured. And even more remarkable, Confucius had a son. That son had a son, and for generations his bloodline continued unbroken. Today, over 2 million descendants trace their lineage directly to him, the longest recorded family tree in history. During the Cultural Revolution, many hid their heritage to survive, but today, some proudly declare, "I am the 85th generation descendant of Confucius." They bow at his tomb in Khufu, light incense, read his teachings, and honor the lineage that survived centuries of war, fire, and oblivion. And the wisdom survived, too, spreading far beyond China. His name now appears in universities, philosophy books, diplomacy, business ethics, moral psychology, parenting. From classrooms in Beijing to lecture halls in Harvard, from leadership books in Europe to schools in Africa, Confucius lives. The man who once walked barefoot through ancient lands, teaching virtue in silence, whose body returned to dust on a bamboo mat, now shapes the world across borders, centuries, and generations. The fire may have burned, the ashes may have scattered, but the sage, once forgotten, once mocked, once hunted, is eternal. His words are water, flowing, soft, yet unstoppable.